Hi there, you're listening to the Paralegals on Fire podcast show where you'll be getting tips and actionable strategies that you can use right now to fast track your paralegal career. I'm your host, Ann Pearson, former paralegal and paralegal manager who left big law in the concrete jungle to start my own company, the Paralegal Boot Camp, where we give online courses that help paralegals make more money, increase their job security, and cut out the learning curve. All right, let's jump right into today's episode. I sent out an email to my subscribers and I said, this is a VIP invite. Ask me any question that you want. No question is off limits. And this was an exclusive invite just to my email subscribers. And so if you want your question answered, how do you get that answered? Become an email subscriber. So I received a bunch of questions and I decided that's going to be part of the podcast episodes coming up. And those are going to be the first ones that get answered. And so I got quite a few. And I'm going to start with one that is kind of long, but I'm going to read it. I'm going to read it exactly as it's written. And they actually also have the option of saying that they want it to be anonymous or not. And I'm going to share exactly how she wrote it. Here's the question. Hi, Ann. This is an anonymous question. I'm in my 60s and have been a paralegal for almost 38 years in litigation defense in large firms. I'm well-versed with e-discovery platforms and now AI, thanks to you. I'm fluent in Excel, PowerPoint, and Case Notebook. I'm not afraid of technology. I have complex document management, expert deposition prep, and jury trial experience. I make a good salary and substantial overtime. All right, all you guys listening are saying, ooh, okay, what's the problem here? While I embrace being a workaholic, ooh, don't know that I like that, but okay. While I embrace being a workaholic, there is little work-life balance and no reward other than more work. We can all see that. I'm not ready to retire, but don't want to continue putting in 50 to 60 hours a week with a commute on top of that. I do not want to be a hot seater during trial. Doing it during a mock trial was extremely stressful. Sales is not my strong suit. I'm exceptionally detail-oriented and used to working under pressure. How can I parlay my experiences beyond a big law firm? Where do I go from here? All right. Where do I go from here? So, in her 60s, lots of experience. Like, wow, that is a great amount of experience, I have to say. Your resume will look awesome. So in addition, I will say, so there was some email back and forth, me getting a little bit more detail. So I'm not going to give you that amount of detail because, if you worked with this person, then you might know who this person was. But so lots of experience that this person has. And so where do you go from here? You don't want to work at big law anymore. You're tired of these long hours. My first thought is in-house. With the amount of experience that she has with litigation, e-discovery, working in a big law firm, working for or representing big corporations, I say go to work for one of those big corporations. That would be my first. My first would be in-house. Those big corporations, they're not going to, even though you represent them, they're not going to reach out to you and say, hey, come work for us because they're a client, right? But that doesn't mean you can't reach out to them. So my first would be in-house because you've got all of the experience that they're already looking for. You're not going to be working long hours when you go in-house. You're going to be taking on a much higher role. You're going to get to do all of the things that you're doing now. You're not going to be expected to be a hot seater at trial. That's going to be the people at the law firm that you're working for, right? All of that stuff is going to be the work that you're doing now. So definitely in-house that would be my first highest recommendation. And nowadays, back in the day when I was at a law firm, usually when you went in-house, that meant making a pay cut. But nowadays, that's not the case. The in-house paralegals that I talk to, they're not taking pay cuts when they go from a law firm to in-house. So that would be my first recommendation. My second recommendation would be, so you said not sales, but I'm going to say a vendor, but not as a salesperson. So they have these roles that are either titled project manager or litigation consultant, but mostly project manager roles. And I've talked to a bunch of them. And what they are former litigation paralegals who go to work for e-discovery or trial type vending companies. And you are a project manager. And that's a person who's appointed to a sales, like a high level sales role, so that when they bring in these big projects, they need someone to manage them. And they want someone with a high level experience like you to manage that project. Someone who knows what it takes to manage a litigation case. Someone who knows what it means when a big e-discovery project comes in, how to do that project. So you're not physically doing the e-discovery files, right? They've got the tech people that are doing that. You're managing the tech people and you're interfacing between the client, like the paralegal at the law firm, and the attorneys at the law firm. You're interfacing between them and the tech people and the salespeople. And from what I understand with the vendors and the project managers that I've talked with, litigation paralegals with your level experience are perfect for those roles. So that's my second recommendation. My third would be a role that would be along the lines of like regulatory or compliance. If you've been listening to the podcast for a while, you might recall I can't remember her name, but she was in a role it was called like a healthcare compliance role. And she was a former litigation paralegal. I think she did maybe malpractice litigation. And she moved into a healthcare compliance, like regulatory paralegal. And so that would kind of be along the lines of in-house, but it's a little different. So in the compliance or regulatory role, you're not a paralegal. You are a compliance person. So you've got this specialty of litigation. And because of that email back and forth, I know like the fields that you work in. So let's say whatever your specialty area is, and I'm going to give this a broad range, not just for you. It could be anybody who has this similar question. You look at the experience that you've gained throughout all these years, and let's say it's environmental litigation, then you would look for compliance and regulatory work in the environmental field. If it's maybe cybersecurity or construction or healthcare, it could be if it's like insurance or like employment or OSHA type work, maybe it's a risk management type of regulatory type field. So those are three big areas that if you're in your 60s, you're not ready to retire, but you're ready to move away from big law, those would be the three big areas that I would recommend. Now, I can't end the conversation without also bringing up, what about, like, are you close enough to retirement, or are you in a position where you would think to yourself, well, I don't need a full-time income, but maybe I might want a less than full-time position, and maybe I might want to create courses, right? There are a lot of ways that you could take your experience. You have a lot of experience, right? What was that? 38 years. I have to look at my notes here. Almost 38 years in litigation. That's 4 decades. 4 decades of litigation experience. I'll bet you have a lot to teach to paralegals, right? So maybe it's not even going into business for yourself. You could, if you could take a big cut in salary, if you were willing to do that, it could be going and teaching as an adjunct professor at schools. What a lot of people don't tell you, so they say you can't You can't necessarily go teach right at a law school or something like that, but you can teach in college at a level, one level below whatever college degree you have. Okay, so most schools. So if you have a bachelor's degree, you can teach at an associate degree college. If you have a master's degree, you can teach at a bachelor degree college. So look into that if that's something, if you could take, that would be a big pay cut if you're going from big law to that. Just something to think about. But go back to those main three areas, okay? Regulatory compliance, project manager position at a vendor, litigation vendor, or an in-house corporate position. Probably the vendor and the in-house corporate would be the most lucrative. Let's assume you're going to go one of those paths. What I would recommend then you start doing is start documenting your wins. That's 38 years, 4 decades. That's a lot of stuff, right? You're not going to be able to go back 38 years, but start documenting some of the wins, some of the workflows that you've put together, the things that could be transferable skills into these other positions, and start writing them down, because you've got a lot that you would want to be able to put down, because you're going to want to update your resume and update your LinkedIn profile. I'll bet, especially if you've been at that one place for a lot of those 38 years, I'll bet you could use an upgrade on your LinkedIn profile and your resume. And then finally, talk to somebody. Look into those 3 positions and find somebody who's made that transition. Maybe even reach out to, so I've had a couple of people on the show look at some of the podcast episodes that I've had, and maybe reach out to those people on LinkedIn and say, hey, how did you make the leap? You could even do a search on LinkedIn if you did the keyword search, right? Project manager, litigation paralegal, or healthcare compliance plus paralegal, and see who was formerly a paralegal and went into some type of compliance or regulatory position. All right, so I hope that helped. And again, these questions, the reason why I'm doing these as podcast episodes is that I think that a lot of people might have similar questions. Some of the questions that I've seen come in, I think are the ones that I'm choosing first are ones that are going to be common, I think, to a lot of people, right? People who, I'm not quite ready to retire, but I'm kind of tired of the long hours. And some of the questions are going to be, about finding positions, transferring, all kinds of stuff. I've got a whole bunch of good ones coming up. So you guys are choosing the topic, and that's what the podcast episodes are going to be about, at least for the next near future. I'm going to jump in on some of the topics that I want to talk about too. But if you want to get on the Q&A and send your question in, then go to the website, our website, obviously, paralegal-bootcamp.com. And there's all kinds of ways that you can get on the email list. You can go to the bottom of the page. You can sign up for the newsletter there. You can go to one of the blog pages. There's usually a way that you can download one of the strategy newsletters, or there's a fast track tip page. You can, any of those ways, and you'll be on the weekly newsletter. And that's how you get notified when these new podcast episodes come out. I send out the newsletter every week that says, hey, here's the new podcast episode, and you get notified by email every week. All right, that's it for this week's episode. Have a great week, and I hope that the answer to this question helped. Bye for now. All right, that's it for today's episode. Thank you so much for listening. If you enjoyed today's show, hit the subscribe button in whatever platform you're listening. And please take a quick minute and leave a review of the podcast, and share this episode with just one colleague or friend who you think would benefit from what we discussed today. Share the knowledge, and the entire paralegal profession elevates. See you next week. Bye for now.